You don't need to be a member of the Socialist Party or the SWP or one of Chris Grayling's bogey groups to know that a single issue at the right time can have a huge impact. Trotsky called it the little lever. Well, in the case of welfare to work, the little lever has been well and truly pulled, and the big corporations have taken fright. Last week, this Tesco's branch opposite Parliament was the scene for a protest against welfare to work. Since then, the clouds have been gathering. A Conservative think tank produced a report claiming overwhelming support for Workfare a year ago. 80% wanted the long-term unemployed compelled to work before getting benefits. 50% felt benefit rates were too high. So how does the same think tank believe such a study would turn out amid the current row?
What the public do want to see, very clearly, is an element of something for something in welfare reform and in welfare and in employment support. And that is what this is. It is claimants doing something for getting their benefits. Let's put this into context. This isn't a free ride for the firms. They're providing the experience, they're providing training, they're getting people into work who have very little experience.
And they're pulling out of this now, the companies, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think that's a shame.
The flagship policy, welfare to work, is listing badly. Protesters with laptops, some close to the mainstream, have blown a hole in one of the government's biggest big ideas.
Peter Marshall there will join me now as the Conservative MP Brandon Lewis, the National Coordinator for Youth Fight for Jobs and Education, Paul Callanan, and Managing Director of Wolf Owens, a brand consultancy company who've worked for some of the biggest supermarkets in Britain, EJ Norcori. And thanks to you all for coming in. Brandon Lewis, I'm wondering how we got to this point where you've got major British businesses really wobbling about their involvement in a government scheme that they had pretty much signed up to.
And that, as we've just heard, is a real shame. There's companies out there who've got a commercial view to take to look at what their reputation will mean and what this will mean for their reputation. They're concerned about that. That's why they want to talk to the government about it. I can understand that from their commercial point of view. We've just got to make sure that we don't lose a really good scheme because of a pressure group or a group of pressure groups with a particular itinerary doing something that could actually damage the best interest of the people they're there to represent.
But you agree, I mean, you call it a pressure group, but it has hit the spot. There must be something there if they're pulling back, right?
Well, Tesco's and companies like that are still part of the scheme, and other companies want to reassure themselves, want to talk to the government, and with what's going on in the social media, I can see why they want to do that. What we've got to make sure is that we keep this scheme going, because this scheme is getting young people an opportunity to get work experience, to get jobs, and that's something we desperately need in our economy.
And Paul Callanan, you saw some of the survey results there. I mean, you are not representative of most people in this company who think you should get something and give something in this country.
Well, you're doing something for nothing, basically, with these workfare schemes, and I would disagree. I think the vast majority of people don't want to see their kids going out working for their dole. They want to see their kids go out, get a decent wage, get decent conditions, and the reason these companies...
Or stay at home and just get the benefits and not do anything.
Well, no, nobody wants to see that, but I think at the same time nobody wants to see their kids basically sold off into slave labour. And the reason these companies are wobbling is, you're correct actually, they know what it would do for their reputation. These companies taking on young people, taking on the unemployed and not paying them for it, being subsidised by the government, in fact, is incredibly damaging for these companies, and rightly so.
Are they right to be having second thoughts? I mean, I find that really odd that you get all these companies who presumably thought about their reputation, thought about what it means, talked to the government, suddenly saying, well, what are we doing?
I don't think it's odd at all. I think in this climate, with people worried about where the next paycheck is coming from, anything that talks about work and how you're rewarded for that will cause organizations, will cause big businesses to think about it. I think the big gap is they seem to have gone into this without thinking about the purpose for it beyond profit. They don't seem to have a quick story about why we are in this in the first place, apart from we're participating in the government scheme. And I think that's what these organizations need to get clear about. I actually don't think it's about for a big business, about the merits or lacking of the program. I think it's, why are we in this? Why are we doing this? They haven't told us that story.
Is that the government's problem? I mean, you talked before about, pressure of the social media. As Peter Marshall pointed out, there were 211 tweets on welfare to work. That's nothing.
Well, we've got to be careful about how we read that, because that's obviously tweets that had the welfare to work tag on them. I've been having tweets all day, and I don't think I've seen that tag on any of the tweets I've had. So there's probably a lot more tweets on this, but we've also got to remember.
But would you concede that this could be taken out of proportion, that actually people aren't as angry as maybe the social media thinks that they are?
And I have to say, certainly the reaction I've had from residents and people on the street is very much they do think this is a really good scheme. This is giving young people a chance to get work experience. Normally that's something we assume is for the rich and people with good connections who can get their family and friends work experience. This is the government filling that gap for people who need that support, need that opportunity and something on their CV to help them back into work. It's a good scheme.
They need support, they need real opportunities. They don't need to be sent into work to work for their dole payment. It's meagre as it is. You cannot live on your dole payments. And these companies that are on the schemes are still making millions or billions of pounds worth of profit. There is no reason that you couldn't give these people the experience at the same time as taking home a decent wage for a decent day's work. And the motive is simply about profit. These companies want to increase their profit. They have no real interest in the futures of these young people. They have no real interest in giving them opportunities. And the fact of the matter is this is nakedly about profit and is nothing to do with opportunities.
Well, actually, the facts prove that's wrong. We've got to get away from this anti-business rhetoric. We need businesses to do well. This is not just about retail either. There's companies in engineering and technology part of this scheme. But retail is a huge business for our country. And if people want to get into that business, want experience in it, remember this is a voluntary scheme.
What experiences do you take from working in retail?
Jobs at the end of this? What about if these are the companies providing jobs for people at the end of it?
But that's not necessarily going to happen. And also, the threat always hangs over your head if you want to drop out of one of these schemes, your benefits are cut. And as for giving opportunities and training at Tesco or Asda or wherever else, you know, it's shelf stacking. What kind of experience,
and that's absolutely right.
socially
That's the area
that
that some of the big businesses are backing away from now. Tesco doesn't like that mandatory element at all.
Well, the work experience scheme is voluntary in the first place. People only have to turn up for the first day. They can pull out if after a few days it's not for them. They then have to make a commitment after the first week. But to be fair, so are the companies. So it's only fair. And we are only talking about a matter of a few weeks, 5 hours a day. It's 25 to 30 hours a week. And that is for a few weeks, giving somebody something on their CV that helps them get into work.
Okay,
and around
Paul's
50%
point is you don't need to put stacking shelves on a CV, perhaps. You don't get real work experience from doing that.
Well, I would disagree with that. It's not just about stacking shelves. It's the interpersonal skills and the habit of being at work, working for a company and getting that experience that is so valuable on a CV. And the results of 50% getting into work at the end of it are proving that's right.
E.J. Nakori, if you were advising companies now, would you say don't touch this with a barge pole, or would you say get on with it? You've got the support of most of the country.
Probably something in between. I'd say think carefully about why you're doing this. Get that story really clear and back it up. Make sure that it isn't just about profit. Make sure that you have a real purpose that's tied into what your organization is about. I do think that we need more skills in the workforce, and I do think that there are areas that companies can get clear about. But they haven't done this. They haven't done it.
Provide young people with skills. The government should be investing in socially useful jobs. They could unroll a programme of public works, house building, for example. We've got millions of people on council house waiting lists who can't get affordable
and they haven't got the money for that.
But they have got the money for it. They bailed out the banks. Why not nationalise those banks and take the money back and use that to provide jobs for young people? Use that to...
OK, let me just ask you, I'm going to put the allegations of Chris Grayling to you from this morning, that you're a front basically for the Socialist Party.
Well, I am a member of the Socialist Party, but the Youth Fight for Jobs is certainly not a front. We're supported by 7 trade unions nationally. That represents...
So you're funded by them?
Well, partly, but we're funded by trade unions as well. Youth Fight for Jobs is funded by trade unions that represent 2 million workers in this country.
So
and the reason
he's broadly right. I mean, do you suspect...
No, it's not a front. It's perfectly democratic. It's perfectly above board. We're perfectly honest about it. And the reason socialists are taking up this issue is because it's a symptom of a capitalist system that is utterly corrupt, rotten to the core. And the reason no one can get jobs is because the banks collapse, is because the private sector's collapsed, and the government are attempting to make us pay for it.
I wonder if you suspect, though, if you wore your socialist workers tag more loudly, more visibly...
We do. You saw in that footage there, people were carrying copies of the Socialist paper, our newspaper. We're not dishonest about this.
There were 8 people on that protest.
Yeah, but that is just the start. It's not a case of us, and again, it's not a case of us just wanting to replace the traditional methods of trade unions and of mass movements. We're doing this to start a mass movement. We want to build a movement that links up young people who are unemployed, working class people and the trade unions to change society, and ultimately that's the only thing that's going to answer these questions, is to sweep away a system that is rotten, and the only way we can provide jobs is with...
You've got a lot of work to do here, but let's say with this scheme...
I'm not denying that.
I'm just saying, you know, in terms of what the government's got to do with this current scheme, do you think think it can continue in the way it is without more companies dropping out or at least changing their approach here?
I think it should carry on. I think many businesses hopefully will see that what they're doing for the community is worth doing, and I think we've got to get behind and support those businesses across different sectors and thank them for doing this work to help young people get an opportunity in work experience, to fill their CV, to get more experience, to get back into long-term full employment. That's what we all want, because we've got an inheritance of really bad youth unemployment. We've got to think outside the box and look for new ideas.
Thank you all very much indeed. Thanks for coming in.